before you have to put it away. But tonight I would like to speak about the enormous opportunities that exist for our nation if we were to develop the water resources of the Fitzroy Basin. The enormous opportunities that exist in the Fitzroy Basin in central Queensland. All of us in this chamber would know of and heard of and understand somewhat the importance of the Murray-Darling Basin. It's a food bowl for our nation. It's been of great public policy interest in the past decade, and it's something that's been inquired into and looked at many, many times. It's been part of our history as a nation. Few people might know much, if at all, or even heard of the Fitzroy Basin in central Queensland. There's two Fitzroy Basins in Australia. There's another in Senator Bullock's state over in WA, but the Fitzroy Basin in central Queensland is actually the second biggest water catchment in our country. So the Murray-Darling is the biggest, of course, we all know that, but the second biggest in our country is the Fitzroy Basin around Rockhampton. More water flows out of the Fitzroy River just south of Rockhampton, just south of Yeppoon, than any other river system on our eastern seaboard. It's the largest water catchment, therefore, of course, on our eastern seaboard, and it has enormous potential and opportunity to develop our nation and develop a new regional economy in our country. In the Murray-Darling Basin, in the Murray-Darling system, if you add up all the major storages and dams in the system, those dams and storages have the capacity to store around 80% of the annual average flows of water in the Murray-Darling Basin. It's about 33,000 gigs of that. 80% of those can be stored in dams or storages in that system. In the Fitzroy Basin, and I should say that's 80% as a consequence of the development that has occurred as a nation that we've done. We've built dams, we've got ahead, we've built the Snowy Mountain scheme, we've done other things in the Northern Basin to store water, off-stream storages and other options. The nation has benefited greatly from all of that development. In the Fitzroy Basin, less than 30% of the average annual flows of the Fitzroy Basin can be stored in dams or storages, which of course means that it's a much less regulated system, which of course means it's much harder for us to harness the opportunities that exist in that system currently. I believe that there is enormous potential for us to do more of that, to invest in that region so that we can capture and store more of this water, put it behind a wall or in a tank, and store that for later use, because water in a dam or an off-stream storage is money in the bank. It's the equivalent of putting money in the bank, because at some point in the future you're going to be able to use that water to grow food, to help underpin the development of industry, or simply the growth of towns and communities, and that is certainly needed in central Queensland. And I want to talk about all of those aspects. A few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, myself, the member for Capricornia, Michelle Landry, and the member for Flynn, Ken O'Dowd, hosted a Fitzroy Water workshop in Rockhampton to discuss the options for better use of water and to discuss the need for more water in the region. I want to thank the community of the Fitzroy Basin proper. There were people from all over the place, from as far down as Theodore, out from Emerald, and also, of course, from Rockhampton and Yeppoon, came to that meeting. We had about 130 people there. It was a very successful discussion. And I also want to thank the Minister for Northern Australia, Mr Josh Frydenberg, who was able to be at that forum as well and hear about the enormous opportunities that exist in this part of Northern Australia. There are detailed proposals in place for water storage in this region, and there are specific needs for more water as well. Down on the coast around Yeppoon, the Livingston Shire Council needs more water to underpin the development of its community and town. It is a fast-growing, beautiful community on the coast. Gladstone, further down the road south, needs more water to develop its industry. It's a hub of aluminium smelting and other industries like fertiliser production as well, and traditionally been a high user of energy. But you need, wherever you want to use energy, you usually need water as well, and they are being restricted or will be restricted in the future if new water sources aren't found. And at Rockhampton as well, where my office is, while traditionally they don't run out of water, there is a risk that in dry years Rockhampton could be facing water storages, and new storages could help them manage that risk and ensure that the town of Rockhampton, the substantial city of Rockhampton, does not face a drought in water supply. And on top of all those things in the towns and cities and industry, there is of course enormous potential for agricultural production in the Fitzroy Basin. It already is an enormous agricultural producer for our nation. More cattle live and breathe, and ultimately, unfortunately, Mr. Deputy President, sometimes have to die in the Fitzroy Basin than in the Northern Territory. More cattle in that little region in Fitzroy Basin than the Northern Territory. It's the most productive cattle-producing region in our country, but it has enormous potential for additional production and turnover, particularly through the development of more grain, more cotton, and more consequent more feedlots to increase throughput in that region. And that will mean more jobs in the meat processing facilities that are resident in Rockhampton. There is great potential in this region. And in the time left available to me, I want to spell out some of the detailed proposals that have been put forward in the region. They're on the table at the moment in the region, and the options for development. There are four main potential options at the moment, although there's many more in the future, but four that have been worked up into some level of detail, and I appreciate the input we had from Sunwater, the Queensland Government water supplier in regional areas, who were generous enough to come and present to this water conference about these options. First of all, near Rockhampton, there's a weir called the Eden Ban Weir. It could be lifted higher to store more water, and it would deliver around 80,000 megalitres a year, quite a substantial amount. Further down the road, there's the Rookwood, proposed Rookwood Weir, not a weir at the moment, but also with the potential to generate similar amounts of water per year. Those projects would largely be for the towns and communities that I mentioned in the industry in Gladstone. There would also be some boutique and opportunistic agricultural opportunities, particularly with horticulture in that region. There are other projects, though, in other places. There's the Connors River Dam, which is north of Rockhampton, the northeast of the catchment. It actually receives the most rainfall in the catchment, and this is probably the most productive dam that's under consideration. It has already received federal and state environmental approvals, a very important aspect to developing these projects now, particularly when you're talking about an area that is in the Great Barrier Reef catchment area, but it has received federal and state approval. It was close to being built. Indeed, there were people on the ground building, starting the early works on the dam, and it was principally going to be used to supply coal mines in the Bowen Basin and possible future mines in the Galilee Basin. However, with the coal mining downturn, some of those customers have left, and the mine is not proceeding as is. But there are opportunities now to rework that proposal to expand agriculture, and particularly the Isaacs and Mackenzie rivers, which are very productive, fertile plains close to the rivers, and irrigation could potentially, in that area, produce more broadacre and high-value crops like cotton, grain and others. Further south, much further south in the basin, near a place called Taroom, west of Harvey Bay, it's quite a far way south, there's a project called the Nathan Dam. And the Nathan Dam is one that some may be familiar with in this place. It's been spoken about for almost 100 years. It was first raised in the Queensland Parliament in the 1920s, 1926 if I'm correct, and it's been an ongoing saga. A few years ago, and I give credit to the former Queensland Labor government here, the then, I believe it was still the Beattie government at the time, put it back on the table to expand cotton production largely in the region. It was worked up as a proposal. As part of that environmental approval process, 850 bogger-moss snails were found on the site, and the Federal Department of Environment at the time said that the proponent, Sunwater, needs to move those snails, see if they can be relocated before the project could continue. Subsequently, they found 18,000 snails nearby and said, well, we know that they can exist and there's plenty of these guys, surely we can go ahead. Not so fast. Not so fast. Currently, there's a debate about it's going to Snails Place Centre Pain. That joke has been mentioned before, but it's worth repeating. The Department of Environment, or some environmental officials, are now saying that 850 snails is an important subspecies that needs protection as well. And look, Mr. Deputy President, I think we need to get over this damn phobia in our nation, get ahead and build some things. I look across the chamber here, and Senator Gallagher was the Chief Minister of a state which had massively expanded a dam here in the ACT, a Cotter Dam, I believe it was. And then it rained, did it, or didn't rain? Well, we maybe need to take some hints from her, because we certainly need that sort of kind of drive in central Queensland.